And we are here on YouTube. So for all those watching on YouTube, last week we attempted to do
our pilot.
Yeah, our pilot video recording, but the audio
crashed and burned.
Yes, the audio was very bad. Was very, very bad. So I think this week we've got it covered. So hopefully we can get through a podcast. Get through a podcast this week and have
fingers crossed.
We'll actually have the audio.
Knocking on fake wood plastic.
Hopefully this will be on YouTube today. So let's get the podcast started, I guess. So in 3, 2.
Long as we have faith in our cause,
I'm Mike.
and unconquerable willpower,
I'm Dave.
salvation will not be denied us.
And this is Between the Lines. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in a store than it was 4 years ago?
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And we're back.
We're back. Can I just say from the start of this, we have something very in common. One is you don't know what I'll say, but also I don't know what I'll say as well.
Yeah.
So
both of us are in the dark. I don't know what I'm going to say.
We're literally in the dark right now.
We're both we're literally in the dark as to how this is going to go down. Last week we talked about
we went over some
Second Amendment stuff
as it related to current events with
Yeah.
regards to some of the shootings.
Yeah, some of the tragedies that have happened and the cowards that partook in said tragedies.
Every single one of them.
Yeah, they're all You know what I don't understand is nobody ever points that out, like how, like these people when they do these things that they do, and I don't want to go into it this episode because we have other things planned, but when these people that do what they do, we give them too much. We give them too much credit, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, these were real tough guys going after kids. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, if you really want to make a name for yourself, do what you did on a military base. You know what I mean? Some place where somebody can fight back. Don't do it to innocent kids. Like, you shouldn't do it anywhere. Before anybody starts that bullshit, I'm not advocating any kind of violence anywhere. But my point is they're cowards because they're going after people they know can't fight back.
Well, something I know we're talking about something totally separate today, but real quick, I made the statement that if you're going to raise the minimum age to own not just a handgun, but own also a rifle of any sort to 21, if you're going to raise the minimum age to 21, then it only makes sense and it's only morally justifiable that you in turn make it 21 for draft instances. I know the draft hasn't been in use for years.
Selective service is a thing.
Selective service is a thing, and if it should ever become a mandate for whatever reason, if 21 is off the table for gun ownership, then it should also be off the table for 21-year-olds to be drafted.
Under 21, yeah.
And 2, it should be not allowed for them to be recruited, which means if a 21-year-old wants to be in the military, it should also be off the table, because that's basically essentially what they're saying with raising the raising the minimum age limit to ownership or for ownership to 21 is they're saying you neither have the choice nor can you be given. So
I think a good compromise on that might be maybe for the draft, we say you can't draft anybody under 21.
Yeah.
But if they want to volunteer to go into the service at 18, then okay.
Well, and that's why I was saying last week, I think a good compromise, if we need the compromise, is that 21 gun ownership, parental consent.
Exactly. Yeah.
So why is there such a problem with ownership if you have, and here's why I brought this up, because somebody made the statement, well, the military trains you in use of weapons and they train you. Yeah, but they still have mass shootings on
yeah.
bases.
Oh, yeah.
Fort Hood,
Fort
just a
Hood.
couple years ago, had some mass shootings. It's nothing that's talked about as frequently, but it happens more consistently
Yep.
than most people would want to acknowledge.
Yep.
Is that there are, because you're dealing with people that have possibly already been in the military or are joining the military with PTSD-esque type of mental breakdown type of situations that are going on. And, God bless them for their commitment to things. But at the same time, you have to evaluate these things with these people. Just because they're in a governmental structure, which means the military, doesn't mean that they're suddenly negated from any of the effects that would, take hold of somebody that has mental illness or red flag, so to speak, would give you an idea otherwise that they're stable. So I just think it's hypocritical. I just think it's hypocritical to make demands in one end and then just completely, just flippantly throw it off as if it's, not an equal statement. They are equal statements.
Exactly.
They are very much equal statements. So anyways,
I encourage everybody to go back and listen to our last episode, and because we touch on that in that episode as well. We touch on, if they're gonna say that an 18-year-old shouldn't be able to buy a long rifle, then military service should be reconsidered as well. Because if they're not mature enough to own a weapon, then they're not mature enough to go to war. In my opinion,
exactly.
So, and I get the argument that an 18-year-old is in his prime. Well, if an 18-year-old is in his prime, then mentally he should be able to make those decisions. So I don't know.
I think it's also kind of an affront to, again, parental rights, because if you look at the majority of kids in that age group, and I'm not saying that there's not exceptions to this rule, because we know that most of the exceptions to the rule of responsible ownership in that age group are kids that really don't have any mentorship.
Yep.
If you look at going back to like Facebook and Twitter, some of these kids that would post on their accounts them posing with their handguns that they probably didn't buy illegally or buy legally to begin with, that's what we always point to. It's like, well, look at what 18-year-olds do with their gun ownership. But let's also look at what the life situation of those 18, 19, 21-year-olds are like as well. You're not accounting for the fact that you probably have parents involved in the lives of those kids that are telling them that these stay locked up when they're not in use for something specific.
Yep.
You're not to ever touch these,
That's rule number one. My son, I tell people all the time, they talk about how kids shouldn't have ARs and they're not trained and this, that, and the other. My 12-year-old has shot my AR plenty of times. In fact, when it comes to him using that gun in accuracy, I'd put him up against several adults.
Yeah.
Because one, I've taught him, and that's my point I'm trying to make is I've always taught him respect.
Yes.
Respect for the gun and respect for, you never point the barrel of a gun at anything you don't want to destroy. That's always the way I put it, because even if it's not intentional, accidents happen, and that gun can go off, and if it's pointed in the wrong direction, an accident becomes a tragedy pretty quickly.
Speaking of which, did you ever see that video of that guy who was a sight trainer, like he was a gun range trainer? I know which one you're
talking about.
And it looked like a .357, like a Magnum revolver of some sort.
He was trying to teach gun safety.
And he put the hammer back, and he's sitting there, this is what you don't do. And then he basically fires off and slaps him right in the forehead. And then the kid in the background's like, did you mean to do that? And he's like, yeah. and then he if this is the video I'm thinking of, then he grabs like an M4, M16 type rifle, and he's like, and then let's look at it, and all the kids are like, no. So that's to say there are people out there that are irresponsible and should not be looked at as the norm. But
even what you would consider to be an authority on guns can sometimes be idiots.
Yeah.
Humans are stupid at the end of the day. So you got to remember, everyone's fallible. But the point I'm trying to make is when my kid has been shooting guns since before he started school, since before kindergarten. Obviously it started out with BB guns and 22s and stuff like that. Probably about the age of 8 is when he shot my deer rifle for the first time, because I was teaching him how to hunt and things like that. In Pennsylvania, we have what they call like a youth mentor program, where I can take my son hunting and he gets a deer tag, but I have to be with him and all that other stuff.
Gotcha.
But you don't want to, you don't want the first time that the kid is shooting a gun to be when he's shooting at a deer. So you want to get him acclimated to the kick of the gun, what's going to happen when it goes off, things like that. So I've always stressed to him the utmost importance on respect and safety for the gun. Not only that, but as a hunter, I've taught him empathy. Every kill is a big deal.
Yeah.
Whether it's a squirrel or a rabbit or a deer, every life is sacred.
Yeah.
Every life is important. So every animal that we kill, we thank the animal. I wouldn't call it a ceremony, but there's a little bit of a ceremony. Like,
Yeah.
I've always taught him a little prayer to say, thanking God. For those that aren't religious, I'm sorry, I am. But we thank God for providing, for this animal giving its life for us. But I've always taught him, and I think that's the important thing, is you got to teach kids not only the gun safety part of it, but empathy. Yeah. You got to teach them that life is sacred and life is important, and every life, whether it's a fly or a squirrel or a rabbit, whatever it is, that life is important. So when you take it, it's a big deal.
Well, interesting enough, and not to go down a rabbit trail, which we'll easily do.
We always do. That's our milieu.
If you look at communities in which, if you want to refer to them as more rural communities, which ours kind of teeters between rural and suburban, I would say. Yeah. Because we have some decent-sized areas.
Williamsport's the biggest little city in Pennsylvania,
population-wise, and whatnot. But there's some other areas not too far from us that have decent populations. But my point is that, by and large, up in this area, you would have a larger contingency of people that are gun owners, maybe simply for the fact of going hunting. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yep. And a lot of those people probably have never carried a sidearm on them in their entire lives, but they've had a culture of working with guns their entire lives because they're hunters. Yep. But the thing of it is that that's just to point out the fact that, everybody gets this idea of gun ownership like Hillbilly Jim running down the street with ARs strapped to his back while he's driving his Confederate flag truck down the street. Yeah. They don't recognize the fact that these are just normal, everyday human beings that have never had an instance in which they have had to use a gun, nor do they ever hope to have a reason to use a gun on another human being for any reason whatsoever. But it's not done out of desire, it's done out of necessity. So, I lived in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. 20 years, I grew up, actually more than that. And there were points at which, in my mind, it became necessary to keep a sidearm on me. Did I want to? Did I want to engage with somebody? Did I anticipate or look for situations when that would happen? No, but I was approached sometimes at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning coming back from work sometimes from just random strangers. You can't tell me that there isn't a certain side, and I'm not going to sit there and expect for somebody to run to my rescue at 3 a.m. in the morning. So, and nothing ever happened, and that's the key point I want to point out. Nothing ever happened. I've never been mugged. I never had a knife or a gun pulled on me. I probably got threatened to get my face bashed in because I told a joke or too many to somebody. Yeah. But beyond that, I've never been in a situation that would have caused me or gave me reason to ever have to do anything like that. And I should never hope that there will ever be a reason.
And that's a good point too, because one thing that I think all responsible gun owners have in common. You made two good points that I think all responsible gun owners share. Is one, I'd rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Exactly.
And two, police respond in minutes when seconds matter. Yep. And another point, I'll add a third, is people assume that gun owners carry these guns because we're just itching to use them.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I can't wait to blow somebody away. That's farthest from the truth.
Yeah.
I carry my gun praying and hoping every day that I never have to use it.
Yeah.
I never want to have to use that gun. But I'd rather have it in the event that I do need it than to be a victim and wish that because I know there's stories all over the place of people that one very powerful story before we move on, because we're rabbit trailing again, but a lady was sitting in a diner with her parents, and a shooter came in and he started shooting randomly people at the diner, and her parents were killed. And the whole reason why she didn't bring her concealed carry with her was because there was a sign on the door that said no firearms. So if she would have if she would have felt safe in bringing her gun in that establishment, she would have been able to defend herself and her parents would most likely be alive today. So the point is we as gun owners, we try to be responsible, we try to be respectful, and we try to abide by the laws, but criminals don't give a shit about a sign on the door that says no guns allowed.
Yeah.
So when you have these gun-free zones, all you're doing is taking law-abiding citizens and putting them at risk because criminals don't care about the law.
Exactly. And
So
I mean, they always negate the fact or neglect to point out the fact that, even the CDC itself did a study back in 2013 that states very plainly that nearly 500,000 to 3 million instances are documented every single year. Now, I know that's a wide range of numbers, 500,000 to 3 million, but they substantiated through several years of looking back through historical data that 500,000 to 3 million instances of successful defense of individuals occurs every year with the use of a firearm. Successful.
How dare you?
So I apologize for using facts in the context of our discussions, but that is a fact.
It far outweighs.
It far outweighs. What were you going to say?
It far outweighs the number of people that are victims of violent crime because of guns. The people that successfully save, and that doesn't mean that they used their gun and killed the other person.
Yeah.
But sometimes simply having it on you and a criminal seeing, oh shit, okay, that guy's got a gun. You don't even know the numbers on that. How many times people have said, oh, okay, that guy's got a gun, so maybe I shouldn't rob this place right now. You don't. There's no statistics on that.
No.
So I mean, the number's probably even higher than that of the amount of times that a good guy with a gun has stopped a bad guy with a gun simply from being there.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a great point.
But with what we're saying, I don't think this was too much of a rabbit trail, because one of the things that
sets up, I think, what we were going for.
One of the things that came to light to me recently, just with some of the discussions that we've been having and some commentary I've been reading with regards to statements we've made in various forums and whatnot, is this idea that you can't have mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive ideas existing within the realm of what you believe or what you adhere to. And it drives me nuts because, it's this, again, it all comes back to this idea that if you don't subscribe to a specific platform of beliefs, then suddenly you're discounted as having any credibility with regards to, anything that you comment in or weigh in on, so to speak. So it just drives me nuts. So, and just for people that are out there are a couple terms that we want to discuss today, I think, and I just want to just put them out there real quick so that people know exactly what we're talking about. One is cognitive dissonance, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Cognitive dissonance is the belief or the understanding of a person that has a belief but acts not in accordance to that belief, and then the resulting psychiatric effects that it has on a person because they're not acting in accordance to their beliefs. That's one. So that's cognitive dissonance. The other one is mutual exclusivity or mutually exclusive. So when you have two ideas that are mutually exclusive, and I'll give you a simple example, dice. So you have a dice with even and odd numbers, but they act coherently because they're used in the context of a game or whatever the case be. I know that's a very simplistic.
No,
but
sometimes that's the best.
That's the idea, is mutually exclusive. Mutually inclusive would be the idea of what I pointed out before is, let's say you're upgrading your car or you're rebuilding a vehicle. So you go out, you're putting the finishing touches on the car, and you need an alarm system for it, let's say. Let's say you just built, for me it'd be a 1969 or a 1970 Mach 1 Ford Mustang with convertible top,
Nice car.
So I had a chance to buy one years ago. It was it had a Cleveland 351 medium block in it. It was gorgeous, but it needed some work. And plus with those, sorry, I'm getting into car stuff.
It's all right.
The convertible tops on them are usually the first thing you have to replace because the old ones, they would degrade, like they would just fall to brittle in no time. But anyways, neither here nor there. The point is, mutually inclusive would be me buying an alarm system for that car and also buying new seats or new tires for the car, or whatever the case be. They're separate things, but they're mutually inclusive because they're involved in the same thing. Ideally involved. And then the other thing I want to touch about a little bit that I think kind of plays into some of these ideas is cultural appropriation, or as I like to call it, cultural inappropriation, as they like to call it nowadays. They like to make it inappropriate that you pull onto yourself or absorb in any way, shape, or form, or acclimate in any way, shape, or form something that is claimed as a rightful cultural forbearance or display, or whatever you want to throw in there. So, but there's some other ideas that we'll throw around, but they're just kind of the thing. So, based off of what we were just talking about, just with gun ownership and whatnot, can you be somebody that is hardcore, we need to stop and figure out what is causing this country to be so violent, and at the same time be a gun owner? Because for some people, they're mutually exclusive, which means in their minds they have nothing to do with each other, even though mutually exclusive means they have something to do with each other. So, thoughts?
And I think let me just make sure that I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. So, mutually exclusive is like you said, I support the Second Amendment and I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. At the same time, I recognize that we have a culture of violence currently in this country, and something needs to be done to protect our kids at schools and things like that. I can have both of those thoughts. I can have the principle, which is one of my values. I can have the principle that gun ownership is necessary for the safety and freedom of all American citizens. At the same time, I can also say something needs to be done to increase security at schools to prevent kids from being harmed while they're going to school.
Exactly.
I can have both of those thoughts and my head won't explode.
Yeah. What you're saying, there's a core median principle. There's a median. If you know what a median is, it's the dividing line between two roads. So in somebody's mind, they may see southbound and northbound, but in our minds, there's a median strip too. There's a balance between those two ideals that exist.
Exactly.
And that's the reason why people have a hard time wrapping their head around this idea of mutual exclusivity with regards to certain stances, such as I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe that we need to figure out how to end violence in this country.
Another good example would be I can be pro-life. And I can also understand that there can be a situation where an abortion is not only necessary but probably the better idea. I can have both of those beliefs. I can believe that abortion is evil and it shouldn't be done whatsoever, but at the same time I can also understand that there are going to be situations where it's necessary.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because I've seen that kind of commentary going around, and some may characterize it as a cheap shot, but at the same time, it's got to be taken into consideration. It's like we're going to make such a hard stance with regards to not just violence, because the issue isn't violence right now. Let me just point that out. The issue hasn't really become violence. In other words, nobody's really stressing the point that we've become violent or that we've become more hateful.
Not like we're living in Mad Max.
Yeah,
You know
not
what
to
I mean?
that point.
We're not.
At the purge yet. You know, it hasn't
Yeah.
been a constitutional mandate that every year there's one day of the year when we kill each other to keep populations low.
Yeah.
You know, that hasn't been mandated yet. But you know, we'll make such a hard and fast stance with regards to violence, but not just violence, but specifically gun violence. And then we'll turn around and we'll be completely okay with a very simple statistic that over 1 million, close to 1 million abortions are I almost said committed, but are done every single year. So you get what I'm saying is that, and I get that within the mix of those 1 million, I said 1 billion,
Man.
1 million abortions, and it fluctuates every
Sure.
year. It can be between several 100,000 to 1 million or so every year. But the point is that, you know, I relatively cognizantly understand that within that mix of 1 million, there are instances that were probably necessary in which people had the right to choose to go that direction. But I also cognitively recognize the fact that there are people that were put in situations, mothers specifically, that were put in the situation where they recognized that it could have been a physical detriment to them to have the child, but still went through with the birth.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying though is that to me they are mutually opposition. They're mutually not exclusive ideas. They're opposites. Those are two opposite ideas that don't exist.
I wonder if these arguments could be used both directions. Bear with me a second. What I'm saying is the left and right, though they argue a lot, they have a lot in common on these two issues.
They do.
These two issues, they're very similar. So on the left, it's a hill that they're going to die on, that abortion rights should be absolute.
Yeah.
They believe that there should be no restrictions on abortions whatsoever, and that you should have the right in any case to choose to have an abortion anytime you want.
Yeah.
For those that believe that, that's how we feel about the Second Amendment.
Exactly.
We feel like there should be no restrictions on the Second Amendment, and you should have the right to use the Second Amendment anytime you want to without any restrictions.
Yeah.
If we could come together and say maybe we use abortion and the Second Amendment as a bargaining chip so that we can come to a common ground. All right, look, I'll stay out of your abortion rights if you stay out of my gun rights.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can come to some compromise. Okay, I don't agree with abortion, but maybe we can set a time limit on when a what I would consider a cosmetic abortion, meaning you just decided you don't want to have the kid.
Yeah.
You know, there's no medical problems, there's nothing like that. You just decided you don't want to have the kid. Maybe we put a limit on that, and then we keep open the option for, risk to the mother. The risk of the mother, I think, is the only exception, because think about it this way: if it's cosmetic, then there's a limit on 16 weeks or whatever we come to. The other arguments are always rape and incest. They should be able to have that abortion within that time period as well. So the only real caveat outside of the initial, first trimester, we'll call it, would be, risk to the mother or risk to the baby. So then we give them that. And then in turn, we could say, all right, well, obviously the Second Amendment is not absolute. We've already given up machine guns and automatic weapons. We've already given those up. Maybe we raise the limit to 21, like you said, or let's start making some concessions that way, and maybe we can put both of these issues to bed.
Yeah.
Maybe we can come to a common sense compromise on gun control, and we can come together on a common sense answer to abortion rights.
Yeah.
Using because the right will be able to look at the left and understand that they feel about abortion the same way we feel about the Second Amendment. And then the left will be able to look at the right and understand, okay, they feel about the Second Amendment the same way we feel about abortion. And maybe we can use that as some common ground to start a discussion. You know what I mean?
But that would be the hope. I mean,
I get that.
On this, just so people know, if they haven't watched this before, I mean, we try as best as we can to take a middle road with regards to these situations, and it's not for the sake of passivity. It's not for the sake of being a Quaker about
likes
it.
And clicks or anything like that.
It's not for that reason. It's simply for the fact that we try to see that there is a balance in these issues that are being approached. Now, understand, sometimes we say stuff that might be construed as taking umbrage with the left or taking umbrage with the right. But at the same time, the point is to point out perhaps the glaring disparities in their arguments, or also to point out, like you just pointed out, the glaring commonalities that exist between the two arguments. So that's the hope, because, you know, what I wanted to try to get at today with bringing up these couple subjects is just this idea that let me backtrack a little bit. I personally believe, just looking at the temperature of the country within the last, I'd say, 10 to 20 years, maybe further than that we have gotten very diametrically opposed to each other. And we have allowed the far of each side of the argument to become the predominant voice with regards...
Because the extremes are always louder.
Exactly. And I think we've done less in trying to mitigate. I think we've really done a piss poor job of trying to mitigate the loudness, or turning down the volume, so to speak, of, you know, the far left, far right with regards to these arguments. And ultimately, we're not making any progress with regard to it. And also, being that social media is the way that it is nowadays, Twitter, Facebook, you know, all the other, you know, social platforms that you can imagine, both underground and above ground, you know, those being the case of, you know, those being kind of the norms of, you know, national communication now. This is the way that people have conversations, unfortunately. But still keeping in mind that it's not the majority of people that are talking on these platforms. You know what I mean? We talked about this before, that, you know, Twitter and Facebook really, you know, all the commentary that floats around on these platforms, it really doesn't capture the whole of what's going on in the country with regards to thoughts. You know, most people are working their brains out, working their asses off each week, or just trying to concentrate on the things that are important to them. You know, or just choosing to concentrate on the things that are important to them, to the point where they're not even paying attention to a lot of this stuff that's going on. And, you know, to one degree, I congratulate them for being able to keep their nose out of that stuff, because I know that you can get sucked down holes after a while that you can never come out of. But at the same time, there's got to be a certain level of awareness that's going on within the context of the country. And you should be aware. You should be aware to some degree of what's going on, because it does affect you, you know, whether indirectly or directly. But that being said, I think it's really important to understand that, you know, anybody with two eyes, two brain cells to rub together, two ears to hear what's going on, can see and hear and understand that there is a diametric division. There is a very big disparity that has grown and has developed within this country with regards to opinions. And if you're not right, you're wrong. If you're not left, you're wrong. And everything in between is kind of forgotten. So there's no balance. There's no discussion. There's none of this mutually exclusive ideas. There's none of this mutually inclusive ideas. You know, that's all Boulder Dash, because there's no way that somebody could have two opposing ideas and still walk a straight path, is basically what they're saying.
Exactly.
So, and I think that's wrong to say, because there's a lot of examples out there that we can go over. I'll give a quick one. This guy, Nasan Joaquim Garcia, who was the head of that Texas Mexican mega church in California, recently that was indicted on counts of sexual molestation and taking advantage of girls that were in his congregation. And he was actually, it was reported, I mean, it's all over the place.
Gross.
Gross. And this guy was using, the Christian message of salvation to convince these girls in a state where they were impressionable to believe that it was godly to be acquiescent to his request. That guy should have his balls chopped off.
Absolutely.
And should be stuck in jail for the rest of his life or whatever else you can imagine.
Bury him under the prison.
So, I mean, there's not going to be a prisoner in that prison that's not going to have it out for that guy.
He's not safe.
He's going to have to be in maximum security prison just to keep him safe from the other prisoners.
Yeah, he's not safe.
He's not going to be allowed in the courtyard to go lifting weights and playing basketball and all the other things that prisoners do on their daily rotations. But, that being said, this is a very extreme example of where you can have ideas that are not mutually inclusive or exclusive.
Yeah.
You cannot teach some Christian value and then turn around and try to prey or be a predator of underage children.
Yep.
In any degree. I don't care if they were adults. If they were adults, it would still be wrong if he was preying on adults. It doesn't matter the age group. It's just more disgusting because of the age group. So you get where I'm going with
absolutely.
this.
Yeah, those two ideals are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
I guess would be the term that you want to use. It is mutually exclusive to believe in Christian values and at the same time molest kids. Those are two mutually exclusive ideas.
But what I'm trying to get at is the term mutually exclusive means that there's a median between those two ideas, like a die.
Yeah.
You have odds and evens, but yet they form one die.
Yes.
This was not a die. This was not these were not two ideas that had any relation to each other whatsoever. And what people need to understand is they need to be able to delineate between that. They need to be able to cognizantly, I can't even talk, look at those ideas and understand
Words are
that
hard.
they are. That they have no relation to each other. And for you to sit there and what that does is it causes people that have had no exposure to maybe that faith, whether it be a Muslim faith or a Jewish faith or a Christian faith or atheism or whatever the case be. Let's say, for instance, you had a couple of people that were preying on kids underage and they were atheists. Suddenly, let's say the same situation applies, that this Nassan Garcia, this atheist was applying, he was preying on somebody. Somebody from the outside who's not an atheist would look at an atheist and say, well, all atheists are going to be people that prey on children. That's you can't prove that. That is completely bullshit. And
I'll even go out on a limb and defend Democrats here.
Yeah.
Because there's that same exact mentality out there right now where some people on the left feel like it's okay to teach transgenderism to kindergartners, and we say that that's grooming kids. So in turn, there's this movement now on Twitter or whatever where everybody is calling Democrats groomers or pedophiles and things like that. Just because one small little subset of a certain group believes in a certain thing, you can't paint every person with that brush. Just like with people that support President Trump. You can't paint everybody that's a Trump supporter as somebody that, was at the Capitol on January 6th. You can't paint everybody with that brush because obviously we weren't all there.
Well,
and
that's the thing is that they're trying, the context, and I was reading through the hearing transcript from the hearings the other day, and there's just a lot of hyperbole in there. There's just really a lot of hyperbole, and not to get wrapped up in that right now, but, to your point, it's almost this idea is that if you at any given point in your political voting lifetime have voted for Donald Trump or somebody that somebody didn't agree with, then suddenly every single person that's ever voted for that person is as guilty as that person for everything that person has ever done. And that's what they're basically saying, is that whether you were at January 6th or not doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're guilty of what happened at January 6th if you
Yeah.
voted for Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
That's basically the condescending tone that comes across and the hyperbole that comes across.
And that's just not the case.
And that goes for Biden too.
It does.
It's like I think Biden's an idiot. I think he's a complete idiot. But I'm not going to go around and say that every person that voted for Biden doesn't have two brain cells to rub together. People were fooled. I'm going to say people were fooled into believing that he was a good choice counter to Donald Trump. And, we learned that people that voted for him are now regretting their decisions. There's a litany. There's a plethora of opinions that exist out there with regards to yes or no. Did they make a good choice?
I voted for Trump, and am I in 100% invested in every decision that Donald Trump made? No. Do I think he made some mistakes? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think, in all honesty, do I think that the speech he gave on January 6th, do I think he incited violence? No, I don't think he did. Do I think that sending people to the Capitol, after, he had to have known, even if it was just a little bit. I'm not saying that he knew what was going to happen on January 6th, but he had to have known that the temperature of that rally was at a boiling point. And to send people to the Capitol when emotions are that high was a bad idea.
Yeah.
I'm just going to come out and say it. The same way, I'll say that protesting outside of Supreme Court justices' homes is a bad idea.
Did you hear about the guy that was arrested that was carrying an AR-15?
The guy that was at Kavanaugh's house?
Was it an AR?
No, it was a Glock. He had a handgun.
Well, apparently the news doesn't know how to report because I didn't read that.
Well, there's been all kinds of misinformation on that's out of control. Not saying anything great, but
nonetheless, there was a guy wandering around outside. Who knows with what intention?
He admitted his intentions. He's the one that he called 911 on himself. So he got to Kavanaugh's house. When he got to Kavanaugh's house, he saw that there were either U.S. Marshals or Secret Service, whatever it was outside of the house, and he started walking down the street. And he called 911 and reported himself having suicidal thoughts and this, that, and the third, and they came and picked him up. And he says, I was going to go to Brett Kavanaugh's house. I was going to kill him, and then I was going to kill myself. He had zip ties and duct tape on him. He was going to hold the family hostage and kill Brett Kavanaugh and then kill himself. But he had second thoughts and called 911 on himself. Now, who's to say that those that were posted outside of Kavanaugh's house wouldn't have stopped him? But had he not called 911 on himself, who's to say what would have happened?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But the point is that it's a bad idea when emotions are that high to send a group of people to a certain place. Do I think that Donald Trump had the intention of them breaking into the Capitol and doing what they did? No. I don't think he had those intentions whatsoever. Should he have come on TV as it was happening and immediately say this is wrong, don't do this, I disavow this 100%? Yeah, he should have done that too. There's a lot of things that were wrong about January 6th. But do I think personally, I don't even think that it rises to the level of insurrection. I mean, think about it this way. If these people really went to Washington, D.C. with the intent to overthrow the government, they wouldn't have done so with flagpoles and protest signs.
Yeah.
Every one of those people that was there, I guarantee you, own guns.
Yeah.
If they really, really, really went there with the intention to overthrow the government, they'd have brought their guns. And there were 800 people arrested. There were more than 800 people there. And if they would have brought in their weapons, it wouldn't even been close to a fight.
Yeah.
It would have been over. But that wasn't the intent. I think
it could have been infinitely worse than what it was.
Yeah. My point is that if they really wanted to overthrow the government, they would have come better prepared for that fight. What I think it really was is it was a culmination of frustration and disappointment and honestly coming from that movement, I was in that movement. I even actually was part of a group that went to the Capitol on January 6th, but I decided not to go. I was invited to go. I almost went, but something in my head told me it's not a good idea to go, so I didn't go. And luckily I didn't, because then I'd be on some FBI list. But the point is, I wasn't going to go there to overthrow the government. I was going to go there to, protest and state my claim that the election was not above board. Not that I think that the results would have changed, but there's definitely anomalies that should have been looked at.
Yeah.
I don't think that they went there with the intention to completely stop the certification. I think what they wanted to do was delay the certification. The same thing that with the protesters in Seattle that took over the police station.
Yeah.
I don't think that their intention was to overthrow the Seattle government. What they did was wrong, but I think what their intention was is just to bring light to a certain set of whatever you want to call it, inappropriate actions or injustices within the system. Did they go about it the right way? No. The same thing with January 6th. They did not go about it the right way, and I really don't think that insurrection is the right term.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm a little bit biased, but from the outside looking in, it seemed like a bunch of protesters that just got out of hand.
Well, it'd be also the difference in Portland when they declared the independence zone in the middle of the city, and you had people basically declaring that, the city government had no right there, except, they wanted that right when there were needs for medical treatment and the ambulances couldn't get through because...
So maybe that was a bad example because they actually did take over a portion of the city government and claimed it as their own.
That was Portland.
But yeah, that was Portland. They're still both bad. January 6th, I'm not making excuses for the people that broke in and destroyed property and stole property and things like that. But what I am somewhat making excuses for is some people were just there.
Yeah.
Some people just got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time and were just wandering around the Capitol and left. And not all of those 800 people were quote unquote insurrectionists. Some of them, I think, maybe should be prosecuted for sedition or, whatever thing you want to call it, but they should definitely be held accountable for what they did.
Not for anything, but quite a few of them too. If you really want to look at the characters that we're looking at, these are not normal people. Like some of them, I'm just going to outright
Buffalo
say,
head guy.
Like some of these people are like out there. I mean, by anybody's standards. I mean, just like not normal. You need some medical, psychiatric attention, that type of thing. So, that being said, I just, I think we need to look at this idea, this overarching idea. And again, not to get wrapped up in specific circumstances, but just looking at the whole of the conversation in that it seems like anymore, again, going back to what I said, is that it seems like unless you subscribe, like you click pay now, buy it now, Amazon.com or whatever website, that you're buying this product. Okay, I'm buying the conservative platform, buy now, or I'm buying the liberal platform, buy now. Unless you buy now one of those two products that are on the table, suddenly you're not a part of the conversation. Suddenly you don't make sense.
Yeah.
How is it that you can have these mutually exclusive ideas? And then they start throwing in this phrase of cognitive dissonance, which is this idea that you're going to have psychiatric issues because you can't have opposing ideas and opposing actions. Well, I agree with that on its premise. I believe that a person can't live, day to day if they say that they're businessmen, but, cook the books every day, in their business. We know just there's general moral principles that exist within common day-to-day life that if you break them, it's going to cause some issues, psychiatric issues in that person. We know that. But what I'm trying to state is that these are something that's mutually exclusive and something that's mutually inclusive doesn't involve cognitive dissonance, because we're talking about two, maybe opposing ideas that have a common point of intersection. And that's the thing that we got to understand. It's just like you were pointing out, there can be a balance point between people that are very staunch pro-life or very staunch pro-Second Amendment. There can be a balance between those two worlds. I mean, let's just talk, any idea in general. One thing I wanted to bring up real quick is Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is a writer. She wrote The Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, We the Living.
Glenn Beck's had her on the program a couple of times.
Ayn Rand?
I think it was her anyway.
No, she passed away in the...
Oh, well, then it's somebody that sounds very similar to that.
There's a lot of people there's an institution.
At least the name sounded familiar. So maybe I'm thinking of somebody completely
Ayn Rand
different.
was a Russian immigrant back in the 30s and 40s that migrated to the U.S. But she wrote a number of books. She wrote The Atlas Shrugged.
Who am I thinking of then? Doesn't matter, but who am I thinking of then?
But, anyways, there's been groups. There's been, like, the University of Pennsylvania had an Ayn Rand group. And they had, they discussed, some of her works and how it relates to politics and all that kind of thing. Her big thing was objectivism. That was her key philosophy, I guess you would say. This idea of being able to question everything. This idea of, just everything is not on its face value, that type of idea. Just a real quick description. Objectivism is the tendency to lay stress on what is external to or independent of the mind. In other words, an easier idea is the belief that certain things, especially moral truths, exist independently of human knowledge or perception of them. In other words, moral beliefs are something that are innate to a human being, is what objectivism kind of
you can think of it. The founding fathers in a way were objectivists.
Yes.
Because they believed that the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness existed outside of human knowledge.
Exactly.
It's just something that is.
Yes.
It just is. It doesn't come from any one thing. If it comes from anywhere, it comes from what you would consider God or nature or whatever, something higher than human knowledge.
So as far as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is concerned, and we'll probably jump back into that series here in the next week or two.
A long ways to go.
But we'll be getting on to the Third Amendment. I think. So, yeah, everybody's like, huh.
The most exciting fucking amendment there is.
Well, maybe we can sneak the fourth in there while we're doing the third. We might
have to, because it's...
For content's purpose.
Yeah, that's going to be a quick episode.
But anyways, with objectivism, with this idea that moral truths and there's basic morals that exist outside of the realm of human experience and knowledge, all the Constitution all the Bill of Rights was a restatement, a redisplaying of something that was already held true. Objective truths. So that's what the Constitution does, is it takes basic understood beliefs and rights and then displays them in a more authoritarian format. And, authoritarianism is not a bad thing if it pushes forward the idea of rights that extend to all humans. So if you're talking from a libertarian standpoint, libertarians, their base idea is that the individual is the sole entity. We don't talk in libertarianism is the direct and complete opposite of collectivism. It's like the far extreme of collectivism. It's the complete polar opposite of collectivism. This idea that it's the body of the group that determines what is good and what is right. Whereas in libertarianism, the belief is it's the individual that gets to choose what's right for themselves. And that's where human dignity comes from.
Yep.
Now, going back to Ayn Rand, her very basic belief with regards to rights was that it all stems from property.
Yes.
And I'm not talking I own a piece of land or a house or whatever the case be. Property rights means I own the right to everything that I make, that I build, that I think. Intellectual properties.
Yeah.
So
creative properties.
So those, for somebody in this society, we're getting to the point where we're starting to believe that property is is exclusive from rights in the way that we're treating it. Now, we haven't maybe have had conversations where the right or left have come out and said, very specifically, you can't own anything, but you can still have your Bill of Rights. We haven't had conversations like that. I don't think that conversation will ever truly happen.
No.
But the more that you place pressure on this ability for people to claim right to what they own, whether it's something they create or build or buy or whatever the case be, the more that you make it difficult for people to make that claim to things, the more that you basically pull the carpet out from under people with regards to what their rights are.
Yes.
Because property rights, what are your thoughts with regards to property rights and how they relate to...
Well, it all depends on what kind of property you're talking about. Because obviously you have your personal property, and that would be like the land you own, your house, your car, material possessions is your personal property. Then you have your intellectual property, you have your creative property. I know a lot of people, a good example of an argument against private property in the essence of not meaning land is there's a lot of people that believe that art belongs to everybody. That once a piece of art is created, it no longer belongs to the person that created it. Now it belongs to
the collective.
The collective. It belongs to everybody. And this is a really good argument. I always love to tie in Star Wars. So here's how I'm going to tie in Star Wars. Star Wars fans believe that the Star Wars movies belong to the fans. And when George Lucas went back and changed the original movies to where now Han shoots second now in the movies and Darth Vader screams "No!" at the end of the movie, when he made those changes, there's people out there that believe that George Lucas didn't have the right to make those changes. On the other side of the coin, I believe, as a person that believes in personal property and intellectual property, that those are his movies.
Yes.
He created those.
Yeah.
Those are his property. So if he wants to go back and change them, as much as I hate the changes that he made, he had every right to go back and make those changes. So,
well, when it comes down to it, had it not been for George Lucas or other movies like Steven Spielberg or,
Spielberg went back and changed E.T.
Yeah.
And took the guns out and gave everybody walkie-talkies instead of guns. So, but it was his movie to change.
Yeah.
He decided that it's a kid's movie and maybe they didn't want all those guns to come and shoot the aliens.
Yeah.
So he decided, walkie-talkies were better, which was kind of stupid, but it was his movie to change. So
and we've accepted it as it is for the most part.
We have.
And the thing of it is that had it not been for any of those characters involved, had it not been for George or had it not been for Steven or other directors and their, creative works, there would have been no creative work.
Yeah.
So to say that it belongs to the collective, maybe it was designed to be presented to the collective, for consumption, but the collective has a choice of whether they like it or don't like it.
Yeah.
And some of the collective likes it.
Yeah.
Some of the collective doesn't give a rat's behind,
exactly.
Whether or not he changed something,
exactly.
and some do. So, at the end of the day,
if you didn't like George Lucas's changes to Star Wars, you have the option not to buy the new Blu-rays, and not to watch the new versions of it. You have that option. If you don't like it, don't watch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or personally, I have the originals. I have the original versions of Star Wars. The graphics are horrible compared to the remastered versions, but the story is the story I remember.
Well, and the thing about this in the context of what we're talking about, mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. So here you have George Lucas going back at something that he designed and he found fault with the storyline or found fault with something of it. And then to him, it was bothersome enough to where he needed to rewrite it and reincorporate it, reshoot it, make it part of the trilogy or the 6-part, now 10-part, 9-part, 30-part, that Disney's making it into.
Yep.
But he had mutually exclusive ideas that were going on there. but he felt that they were cognizant. He felt like they were coherent. He felt like they jived with one another, so to speak. And to him, there was no infraction going on in his mind. It was his creation. It was his right. It was, if he completely effed everything up to where nobody ever wanted to watch Star Wars again, I mean, still it would be his right. It would be
Yep.
it would be a tragedy because Star Wars has basically been adopted as a cultural.
Yeah,
It's
on the level with like Johnny Appleseed at this point.
when you have like freaking religions in UK that are the Jedi Knights.
Jedi has become an actual religion.
It's like,
which is insane to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, whatever, to each your own.
But
it's a great example of people thinking that intellectual property belongs to the collective when in fact I'm sorry, but it doesn't. Those are George Lucas's films.
well, if you want to take a more serious subject, let's look at the 3/5 vote real quick.
Okay, the 3/5 compromise.
So I was actually on a site that was called Black History, and it's a group that specifically focuses on history in the United States or abroad with regards. It was really objective. I was really impressed with how it was written because they even put it out there that the 3/5 rule was not written with the intent of defining the moral and physical value of a black human being. It wasn't written with that intention. It was written politically as a compromise to allow the states that were still practicing slavery to use slaves as representation when it came to votes.
yes.
The problem was that a lot of it was again one of these compromises that should have probably never happened. Or no, I'm going to go one step
Yeah.
further. I'm going to say it shouldn't have happened. And it was a compromise that shouldn't have happened, but however, what was interesting to me, why I bring this up, is that they were expecting the United States as a whole, both North, South, West, all of the United States, to accept the South at that point to be allowed or allow them to utilize black citizens, black human beings to vote, give them the right to vote, but they couldn't own property.
Yeah.
So that's why I bring it back to that,
For a little bit of historical context, the 3/5 compromise, as I know it, that was the very first volley in the war to end slavery.
Yeah.
Because if they would have given each slave a whole representation, then the South would have tripled in their representatives, and they would have been able to override any votes against slavery. So had it not been for the 3/5 compromise, we would have never had the abolition of slavery because there was more slaves in the South than there was in the North. So the South would have been able to use their slaves as representative, because it all comes down to the census. So as you know, when they count the census, the number of people that are counted in the census, 100% correlates with the number of representatives they have in Congress. So, for instance, California has a really high population. They get more representatives than, say, Rhode Island, because Rhode Island has very little population. So what the thought was is if they count slaves as 3/5, then the South wouldn't have as much power, and maybe they would be able to end slavery using the diplomatic means, and we ended up having to fight a war for it anyway. But that's the historical context of the 3/5 compromise, was to take the slave-owning power away from the South.
Well, I mean, and the flip of that is that had the South given those people the right to own their property, the right, they would have voted.
They would have voted
so
the opposite
much
way.
Differently.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the thing. That was the whole thing, is that they wanted to keep their shackles on while they were at the voting booth.
Yeah, they
is
wanted
essentially
to,
what
to
was
keep the
boiling
shackles
down to.
on the slave and not allow the slave to have a voice. So they wanted the representation for the slave, but they didn't want them to have an opinion. So that it was a horrible position for the founding fathers to be in, and that's why they they did the 3/5 compromise, and like you said, maybe it was a bad idea, and it kind of is worded poorly, but the intent behind it was actually to end slavery.
Yeah, and so the reason why I even brought that up, and I know we have to tie it up here soon, but the reason why I wanted to bring that up is just
darn flies.
This idea there. I am a firm believer that rights exist outside of human experience, knowledge, or perception. That was the definition.
The government doesn't give us our
objectivism.
rights. They
So
exist.
those rights just exist. I think that every human being, whether they categorize themselves as conservative or liberal or in the middle or libertarian or constitutionalist or whatever their political affiliation is, I think their rights do have nothing to do whatsoever with any piece of documentation that we've ever written. That's the end of it. I think that is hard ingrained. I think that's written in the stones. I think that is something that cannot be changed with time. I don't think it's something that can be changed with the right amount of pressure. I don't think this is a coal mine. I think that those rights were diamonds before the pressure even hit them. That's my firm and utter belief about that. So that being said, I think the one thing that we need to remember is that those rights exist outside the realm of what's going on in this country, politically speaking.
Absolutely.
So I think that every person has a line. I think every person has a center line that exists within them, whether or not they want to recognize it, whether or not they want to give it any kind of credence, whether or not they want to talk about it, whether or not they want people to display anything about it, doesn't really matter. It exists. Whether or not you want to admit that string theory is a thing, or whether you want to admit that dark matter exists, or whether you want to admit that an atom exists, even though we know they exist, whether or not you want to admit that they exist outside of your human experience, your human knowledge, your human perception.
Outside of your observation and perception.
They exist. You can't do anything about it to change the fact of what is a fact. You can't just willy-nilly write a history book and suddenly change what is physics. It doesn't work that way. And my strong, firm, unaltering belief that you'll never be able to change me on is that rights of human beings is no different than the physical laws that govern the universe that we've come to accept. So they exist outside of any of the politics. They exist outside of any of the history text. They exist outside of any of the opinions that exist. Why do I point that out? Because I think they are a firm and fast median, hard line that exists between the right and left discussion that happens within the context of this country. And I believe firmly that any human being has the right to hold to mutually exclusive ideas, has the right to hold to mutually inclusive ideas, because there are medians that exist between them. You do not have to subscribe to a particular brand narrative that has been proposed as being the all-end be-all narrative that encompasses everything that needs to be. I'm just tired and sick and tired and over the rhetoric. I'm tired of the dogma. I'm tired of just people from right and left trying to dictate that you cannot believe something because in their mind it doesn't jive.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people on the left that are hardcore gun owners.
Yeah.
Like Joe Rogan's a good example.
Yeah.
He's a liberal progressive. He believes in abortion rights. He believes in legalization of marijuana. He believes in a lot of the cornerstones of leftist policy, but he's also a hunter, and he likes his guns.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he doesn't fit in any box.
No.
And I think that's why a lot of people, both on the right and left, roll their eyes at some of the things Joe Rogan says, even though there's a lot of things that they agree with. Joe Rogan will say something about abortion and they'll give him the, yay, he said the right things, but then he'll say something about the Second Amendment and all of a sudden he's
demonized.
He's evil. Yeah. He's Satan. And he's a good, Jordan Peterson is a great example. Jordan Peterson is one of the nicest guys in the world. But the left perceives him as the Red Skull from Marvel, and I don't understand that comparison.
It's true because somebody actually did a comic book strip with him,
his likeness as the Red Skull, and on the other side of the coin, like I'll use Tulsi Gabbard as an example. I think she's a pretty, intelligent lady. she's pro-American, and she has some great ideas, but she's also a progressive left type of person. But I also think that she compromises on a lot of things, and she believes in freedom. So Tulsi Gabbard, I think, is somebody that gets a lot of flack from the right, who's actually kind of sort of on our side in a way to speak. So I think that the blame can be evenly spread throughout the political spectrum. I don't think it's the left that does this, and I don't think it's the right that does this. It's everybody, and it's wrong. It's wrong on both cases when anybody does it.
Well, it's because people aren't willing to hear anymore. They're ready to talk. They're not ready to listen in a lot of cases, and I think
there's a concept of I don't really know what it's actually called, but there's people that listen just to respond.
Yeah,
they're not actually paying attention to what you're saying. They're listening, but they're formulating their next argument while they're listening. They're not actually absorbing what you're saying. And again, this is not mutually exclusive to the left or the right.
Yeah.
This is something that exists on both sides. We just listen to respond. We're not actually taking an account for the arguments that people are making. We're reading the comments, but we're not actually absorbing the information and comprehending it and making the connection.
And not for anything. I think every person in some context has perhaps been guilty of that, because given circumstances, context, temperature of the situation and whatnot.
And we're human.
Yeah. And so it's got to be taken into account.
Fallibility for human beings in general.
But I think of an umbrella real quick. An umbrella doesn't work unless it's deployed.
Yeah.
So I think, there's an old proverb that says that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. But, the idea is that within the context of the United States, rights fall both on the just and the unjust. They fall on both the left and the right and the left. They fall on both heads. And I say that in this context that the United States, the way that things were written, the way that things were established, were with the idea of it being an umbrella, not with being a hazmat suit.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it, but you can protect yourself from the rain by wearing a hazmat suit. But, an umbrella does a pretty good job, too, if you use it properly.
And there's a little more freedom in an umbrella than there is in a hazmat suit.
And so it always seems like the groups that want to control the narrative always close the umbrella. Let's imagine you're walking with somebody and you have one of those big old 16, 18-foot umbrellas that covers half the cityscape.
Yeah.
You can protect both of you from the rain if you keep the umbrella up. But the moment one of you gets pissed with each other, you steal the umbrella and close it, and everybody gets rained on at that point.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's just like
and another good example in context of the January 6th riots is you either believe in due process rights or you don't.
Yeah.
I believe that due process rights apply to everybody from Charles Manson to January 6th riots, to the BLM riots, to I think even the most disgusting pedophiles in the country deserve due process. No matter the heinousness of the crime you committed, you still deserve your day in court. And either you believe that or you don't.
Yeah.
And to my fellow citizens on the left, either you believe that those people deserve their day in court, and if they're guilty, they're guilty. If they're found guilty, they're found guilty, and they should accept whatever punishment is doled out to them. But you can't just have indefinite incarceration. There's people out there that I was just listening to Glenn Beck the other day, and they had a guy on that has been in jail for 13 months. Charges were just brought up on him like a month ago. So he sat for a year with no charges. He sat in prison for a year with no charges. That's unconstitutional.
Yeah, it is.
It's completely unconstitutional. That violates his Fifth and 14th Amendment rights.
Even if he was put on probation, like house arrest or something, that would be even more lenient.
He should have been released on cognizance and put on house arrest or probation or whatever you want to call it. But the due process was not applied to these people. And that's heresy.
It is.
not right.
Due process is the difference between mob rule and law rule, or the rule of law, essentially. Because if you don't have due process, you have basically vigilantes making decisions.
Because then you can essentially be held indefinitely.
Yeah.
I mean, in all intents and purposes, they could just hold these people without charges forever and just say, oh, well, the trial will come. The trial will come. The trial will come. That's why we have due process rights in the Constitution. There's time limits set in the Constitution in black and white. It's not even an amendment. This is like written into the main Constitution. And for a reason. And because they didn't want these mock kangaroo trials that they were going through the revolution. Off the soapbox, we'll move on because we got to wrap it up. But either you believe in due process or you don't, and it should apply to everybody equally or it doesn't. And so those that are anti-January 6th, I get it. It was a bad thing, but those people, you should defend and protect those folks' right to due process. You should grasp onto that as tightly as you would any other right, because it's so incredibly important.
And we'll be talking
citizens
about
can't
that.
be held indefinitely.
We'll be talking that more in detail coming up here in the next. Once we hit the Fourth Amendment.
Fourth Amendment, yeah, because I mean that's, in my opinion, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments are the most. I wouldn't say the most important, but they're
up there.
Oh man, they're really important. They're really, really, really important to our freedom, and not only our freedom, but our values as Americans. They're very, very important.
Well, it's really it comes back to that whole balance point between being able to have people that have objecting views that can talk to one another. You don't have a conversation without due process. Due process is just a general thing that needs to happen in the course of a conversation.
Yeah.
If you have two people on opposite ends of the table that are talking to each other, one has to talk, one has to listen. While the other talks, the other listens. In process, and then you think about it, and then you weigh on the things that have been said. In whatever time frame that happens in, that's the process that happens in order to have a conversation. What happens when you don't have due process is you have somebody on the other end of the table screaming at the other person, telling them to shut up, and then physically causing them to shut up, and then telling them it's like, you're going to believe what I believe because I just told you that. And, that happens in all spectrums of life. That happens in religious circles. That happens in political circles. That happens in just any circle that you can possibly imagine. That happens because you always have one party on one side or the other that just is unwilling to treat the other person like a human being, to the point to where they will respect their input enough to where they'll process it duly. Yeah. And, in a way that, allows that person the right to speak. So
without the due process, then they could just throw you in jail and say, oh, well, we'll just hold you until you change your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that could become the thing, is that they're not necessarily detracting the right to due process. And I feel this is an interesting stuff that we could talk about during the next podcast.
We'll definitely come back to this.
But I mean, you could manipulate those laws in any way, shape, or form to essentially, structurally, substantially rip the carpet out from somebody's feet with regards to their due process rights.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
But I just
You can find us on Facebook.com/PA Between the Lines. You can find us on Twitter at the BTL Podcast. And you can find us on our website, thebtlpodcast.com.
Oh, sorry. I was getting into the air horn.
Oh, I love it.
Some people do air guitar. I do air horn.
I love it. So, I guess that's a good place to pivot, because we're going to be getting into the Third, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments here within the next couple of podcasts. So this is a good lead into the next couple of podcasts. So pay attention for those podcasts to come out, and we'll go in depth a little bit more on due process and your right against self-incrimination and so on and so forth. So until then, check us out on Facebook, check us out on Twitter. We've been getting a little bit more activity on Facebook and things like that. So, keep engaging with us. We always like to hear what you guys want to listen to and so on and so forth. And hopefully this YouTube video finds everybody, and you can actually kind of see our faces and kind of get an idea of what we look like and what we stand for through the videos and stuff like that.
I apologize. I'm ugly. I'm sorry.
Neither of us are Brad Pitt, so we apologize for that off the head. But
I'm Pat Britt.
We are what we are. So accept us for who we are.
I am. Said Popeye.
So I guess at this point, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so there's the podcast done. For those that are watching on YouTube, podcast is over. Hopefully the video is a little bit nicer, because we can kind of, talk directly to the audience. So I'm going to stop the recording for the YouTube video here. But thanks for tuning in on the YouTube channel. Check out our socials and things like that. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere the podcasts are found. So we encourage you to go out there and subscribe there. If you like this content, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, the notification bell next to it, so that you know when our videos are dropping. You'll get notified when they're released right away. So like and subscribe if you like this content. And that'll let us know that you want to see more content like this. So again, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and like our video if you like this content. And we'd be more than happy to put more stuff out like this for you.
Like for instance, do you want Dave with his shirt off or shirt on during the
Please,
podcast?
shirt on. It's not the shirt that you have to worry about with Dave. It's his pants.
Yes, they find their ways.
Dave
find a way of getting away.
Dave is a big proponent on a pantless
society.
He's big on that.
Free to win.
So again, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and hit the like button at the same time. Until next time, I hope you like this video. See you later.
Bye.